Okay, on the screen is a picture of a windmill with some tulips, and both windmills and tulips are synonymous with a country in Europe called Holland. And the game that we're going to look at today was played by Holland's only world chess champion, a man called Max Euwe. And Max Euwe played his chess in the first part of the 1900s, and he was world champion of chess, and he was champion in a period of time where the way people opened a chess game was changing. Traditionally in a chess game you would put your king pawn forward and so would your opponent, and then you'd develop your pieces. Well, during Euwe's reign as champion and around the time he played, a lot more people started to open their chess games with the queen pawn, and a lot of people started to use what are called closed defences, where they didn't try to also occupy the centre of the board with their pieces. In this game we're starting to look at another famous chess player called Colle, C-O-L-L-E, was playing white, and he was a very famous chess theorist and strong player. He invented an opening called the Colle system, also known as the Stonewall attack or defence. And the idea was that with these sorts of openings by black, that you would attack the centre and get your king safe, but you wouldn't attack the centre immediately. You'd let the opponent take control of the centre, and then you'd undermine or destroy his central control after your king was safe. So today's game is Euwe using this kind of idea, what I call the little hut defences, or otherwise known as the Indian defences. So Max Euwe, the world champion, was playing black and Colle was playing white. And Colle straight away takes control of the centre by occupying it with his pawns. Anytime you can form a pawn wall in the centre, it's usually a good idea because you control the centre. Not only do you occupy it with your pawns, but you also control the squares that they attack. So you're controlling a lot of the squares in the centre of the board. You've got nice lines for your bishop to get out, your queen to get out, knight to get out, and so on. So that's what Colle did. He formed the pawn wall there. Black now plays differently, and this is what I mean by a little hut defense. He moves out his g-pawn so that his bishop can come out to this square here, and then he'll get his king safe. So he's forming a little safety hut for his king. And white develops naturally. Knight to c3 is a perfect square for that knight, and there goes the bishop to g7. And now Colle occupies the centre with another central pawn. Now that the knight is out, it controls this square, and so we've got 3 pawns in a row, and white is forming what's called a big centre. Black has to play d6 now. He needs to keep control of this square here, so that he doesn't want white to play e5 with his pawn and force his knight to move again. So he has to play d6 to keep some control of the centre. And now f4, and now we have quite an amazing row of pawns along here. And this is called the 4 pawns attack, and what Euwe is playing is called the King's Indian defence. And white's occupying the centre with his pawns, and black is saying, well, I'm going to get a nice solid position before I attack your centre. And so this was a little bit different than normal chess. To this stage, everyone just fought for the centre straight away, and in this version of chess you get your king safe and then you counter-attack in the centre. And so Euwe finishes off his plan. He castles his king, and now he's formed this little hut where his king is very, very safe. And the most important thing in any game of chess is to keep your king safe. That's the #1 golden rule of chess. The other two, of course, are to control the centre of the board and develop your back row pieces. Well, we can see that black has certainly got a safe king, and we can see that white is certainly controlling the centre of the board. White, though, if you have a look, his pieces aren't all that well developed. And so some interesting differences in how both teams are going about playing chess, both armies. So now Colle starts to get his pieces out, and Euwe starts to attack that centre. Now, there's an interesting point in the game here. This move of the pawn to c5 here is asking a question of white. And the question is, do you want the centre open or closed? An open centre in a chess game is when the pawns in the centre are not there. They've been exchanged or swapped off. Any part of the board where the pawns have been swapped off, the pieces become much more powerful in that region. And so Cole, who's playing white, has to decide, do I want the centre open or do I want it closed? A closed centre means that the pawns are interlocked with each other. And where the pawns are interlocked with each other, the pieces are less powerful. So what should white do, do you think? Should he have an open centre or a closed centre? Have a think about your answer. If you need more time, press pause. The answer is that white wants a closed centre. And that's because his king is in the centre of the board. He doesn't want an open area near his king. And so if he was to play d pawn takes c pawn, he'd be opening up the centre. His king would be in a region of the board where the back row pieces could attack rapidly, and that would not be clever because the most important thing is to keep your king safe. So he plays d5 and he locks the centre. Now we've got these pawns here in a row and these pawns here in a row, and they're interlocked, and so that area of the board is closed. Erway plays e6. He moves his pawn up, and the reason he does that is exactly the opposite reason as to why Cole tried to keep the centre closed. He wants to open up the centre and attack this king. As soon as all the pawns exchange, this king will be more exposed to attack. And so Erway's continuing to counter-attack in the centre now that his king is nice and safe. And Cole gets his bishop out, so he develops his bishop, and he's also looking, now that his bishop's out of the way, he's looking to castle his king over here. So bishop to d3 is a good move, and Erway continues to try to open up the centre. He takes that pawn off the board, and which pawn should white capture back with? Should he capture back with this pawn or this pawn? What do you think? If you chose the e pawn, this pawn here, it's a bad choice because then you have an open file right along here with your king on it, and that's something you do not want. You don't want your king on the end of an open file because he's exposed to attack by pieces like rooks and queens that can attack long distance. So certainly the pawn to capture with is the c pawn, and that's what Cole did. And now Erway plays a very, very clever move here. He plays queen b6, and this is a strong move. What's happening here is that the queen is now attacking a very important diagonal. This diagonal here is very important. What it means is if white castled, if he castled his king, then immediately black can win a piece by a discovered attack. Can you see how black can win some material here? The discovered attack. He can play this move, and now it's check. That's a discovered check along here, and the pawn will eat the bishop. And so by playing queen b6, that threat is there, and white can't castle his king. Because of that threat, white now plays bishop c2. So in the game, Cole didn't fall for the trap of the discovered check, but you'll see his king's still hanging out in the open, and this is a big problem for him. Erway now plays the pawn to c4, and now it's illegal to castle. Can't castle because the queen's still attacking this diagonal, and you're not allowed to move your king into check. And so he's stopped white from castling. By stopping white from castling, Erway now has ensured that the white king is exposed to attack. He's unsafe. In contrast, his king is very, very safe here. So if somehow Cole was to fight back in this game, it'd be a very, very long time before Erway was to lose. Whereas with the king out in the open, Cole could lose at any second to a tactic or a checkmate. So that's the idea of this little hut. You can get your king nice and safe and then work on controlling the center and developing your pieces. So it's doing priority number one in chess of keeping your king safe. It's doing that first. Now white queen came out to e2, so it's a reasonably strong move, getting the queen into a good position and attacking the pawn at c4 as well. Rook e8 is a good move by the world champion Erway. Anytime you can, it's a good idea to put your heavy pieces, that is your rook or your queen, in line with the opposing king. Even if there's pawns in the way, it's a good spot to have it because often those pawns suddenly can be exchanged. For instance, if this knight was not here, this knight could take this pawn and wouldn't have to worry about the fact the pawn would take back because it would be pinned onto the queen and the king. So all sorts of tactics start to happen once you put your heavy pieces, your queens and your rooks, in line with the opposing king. So that's the place for them. Bishop a4. So it's a well-placed rook. A good idea in chess is if your opponent has a piece in a good position, then you try to move it off that good position and make it go away. So if you're not sure what to do in a chess game, have a look around and you can either develop your worst piece to a better square, and another good plan is to decide which of your opponent's pieces are in good spots and move them off those good spots. So that's what White's trying to do here. He's trying to disrupt this good this good rook that Erway has at e8. And the method he's using is not all that good. It allows Erway to develop a piece and stop the attack at the same time. And now White has nothing really better than to swap the bishop off, and Erway takes back with his knight. So he got to develop a piece out of that. That's all that really happened. So he's improved his development. And the attack on the king, or the attack along the e-file by the rook, is still there. So things haven't really changed. So it's a bit of a problem, this attack along the e-file for Cole. And he's worried about this pawn here. And so he plays knight d2 to help protect it. This is a bad move, knight d2. One of the things it does is block in this bishop, and it doesn't do anything about the fact that there's all this pressure along here. If we go back to this position, probably a very interesting move, and a move that causes black some problems that he has to solve, will be bishop e3. Now this move attacks the queen and also closes the diagonal, this diagonal, allowing the king to get castled. There are some tactics there that you have to work out, but I think it all works out, and it's certainly a better move than what was played in the game. So this is what was played, and now, as we say, there's all this pressure along the e-file, and this bishop is blocked in and won't take any part in the game. Neither will this rook over here. He's going to be a long time before he can have any impact on the game as well, this rook at a1. So it's a bit of a disruptive move, this. So White's pieces are now what we call uncoordinated, and his king is exposed to attack. And so Erway, being a world champion of chess, sat down, and because of those conditions, he looked for some tactics he could play, and he could sense that now was the time to attack. And what he came up with was the knight takes e4. And the knight at c took back. And this was all calculated by Erway. And his next move was to put his rook from a to c8. So for the moment, he's given up a piece, but only for the moment. This knight is well and truly pinned. It can't run away. And at some stage he can intensify this pin by moving the pawn up, and he'll get the knight for a pawn. So in the meantime, what he's doing is getting another attacker into the game. So he's making sure that all his pieces are in position for the attack before he starts to finish off his attack. So he's developed another piece, and he's bringing extra pressure down this file and protecting this pawn at the same time. So very strong coordinated attack by Erway on the exposed king there. King f1 was played by Cole, and he's unpinning his king. He's getting his king out of the way so that he'll be able to move his queen as well. So sort of like a double pin there. There's so much pressure along the file that the knight was pinned to the queen and then pinned to the king, and he's having to relieve that pressure by moving his king. Once he's moved his king like that, he'll never be able to castle, and that king is fairly exposed. So White sort of tying himself in knots here and hoping to get out. Now f5 that we talked about, we've intensified the pin. The knight's pinned to the queen, and now we attack it with a less valuable piece, a pawn. It wouldn't be any use to play rook takes knight, because knights are only worth 3 pawns and rooks are worth 5, and this knight here would then take the rook. So now a pawn is attacking the knight. Knight takes at c4, grabs a pawn, and also now attacking the queen. So sort of a counter-attack if you like. And Erway doesn't worry about the fact that a rook is worth less than a knight. He plays rook takes knight. And the reason he does that is that he can see an attack that's going to win here. So he's giving up more points. He's played rook takes knight. And Cole is facing some real pressure now from these pieces here, these two rooks and the queen. And he played a move that he thought got him out of trouble. He played knight f6 check. A lot of his troubles were to do with the pin of the knight, and now he thought he got out of trouble here with a check. And he'll be able to get his queen out of the way and get this rook with his queen. So the knight took, and the queen takes back at c4. So if we were to add up the point value of the armies, in other words, with each pawn being 1 point, knights and bishops being worth 3 points, and rooks being worth 5 and queens 9, White's got the bigger army now. He's ahead by what's called the exchange. He's a rook for a minor piece ahead. He's a rook for a knight ahead. But he's got an exposed king, and all of Black's pieces are in good spots to finish him off. So when Erway started his attack, he would have calculated to this position. And the reason he knew there was an attack that could be played was because of the exposure of the white king. Now he finishes off his attack nicely. He plays knight g4. Now, in this position, if it was Black's turn, Black could checkmate. If it was Black's turn, what move would he play to checkmate? If you need more time, press pause. The move you would play is you would move your queen down to f2, and it would be checkmate because it's supported by the knight here. So he's threatening checkmate. And in this actual position, Cole gave up. He resigned the game. But if you were playing white, how could you survive a bit longer? What move would you play? When I ask this question in my live classes, a lot of the responses I get are to do with giving up points straight away, giving up material. But there is one move you can play that doesn't give up material straight away. And the only real good try is queen down to c2. You've then put an extra piece, the queen and the king now both control this square. So 2 defenders of the square and only 2 attackers, you've regained control of that square. So queen c2 would be the best try to keep the game going. And if you were Black, how would you finish off the attack now? What you've got the rook putting pressure right down here, so he controls all those squares. The knight controlling this square, and so a very powerful move is queen b5 check. With that check, either the king goes to g1 or white has to give up a piece. That is a queen. I mean, if you move the queen across and block, then because the rook and the queen control that square, you lose your queen. So the only real try from there is to play king g1. And after king g1, Black now checkmates. Can you see Black's checkmate move? If you saw it, well done. The move is rook all the way down to e1, checkmate. And so that's why Cole had given up. So in this game, what we're seeing is a different way to play the opening, and that is to concentrate on getting your king safe first. This method works best when your opponent starts the game by moving his queen pawn. And then you get your king safe, and then you work on the other 2 golden rules, controlling the center and developing your pieces. So try this idea of the little hut in your games. And always remember that if you're controlling the center, you also have to develop your pieces and get your king safe. In this game, Cole had complete control of the center, but his back row pieces weren't developed, and he never got his king safe. And all of the trouble that he encountered later on was to do with the fact his king was out in the middle, and that Erway put his pieces in good spots to attack that king. So when you get the opportunity, try the little hut defense, or what are called the Indian defenses. And they still use the golden rules, they just go about it a bit differently than the normal classical defenses.